I've made no secret of the fact that my interest in the MCU's taken a bit of a hit since the big blowout of Endgame a couple of months back. It feels to me like the most meaningful story's already been told, and anything beyond this point is just Marvel spinning its wheels, trying in vain to keep the momentum going, like that annoying guy on a night out who always wants to go to one more bar, even though it's 3 AM and you're fighting a losing battle to hold in the contents of your stomach and your bladder. And believe me, I've lost both of those battles in my time. The point I'm trying to make here is that I didn't exactly rush to my local cinema to see Far From Home on its opening night. Neither did I go into it with particularly high expectations, especially since Homecoming was the most thoroughly safe, predictable and unimaginative cookie-cutter example of a Marvel movie I'd ever seen. Until that point, at least. And perhaps that combination of bad experience and general pessimism worked in the movie's favour, because I was pleasantly surprised when I finally dragged my arse in to see it. I mean, Far From Home doesn't exactly blaze new trails in terms of storytelling or dramatic revelations. It's not the kind of movie that's gonna rock anybody's world, but it does what it does tolerably well. And in a summer movie season that's generally been kinda shit and disappointing, maybe that's the best we can hope for. Needless to say, I'm gonna go into major plot spoilers here. It's what I do. So if you don't want to know what happens in Far From Home, go watch something else. Something else made by me. Incidentally, I apologise for the lack of proper movie footage in this video, but this movie was released by Sony, and as I've learned from past experience, they can be real assholes when it comes to copyright claims. Much as I enjoy waiting the full 30 days for my appeal to be answered, I'm sure you'd rather watch this review while it's actually still relevant, so we'll just have to make the best of it. Anyway, with that being said, pour yourself a pint of rum and let's begin. So Far From Home picks up about 8 months after the events of Endgame. The world's getting back on its feet now that all the people wiped out by the snap have been restored, even though everyone else is now 5 years older, so things are a bit awkward, especially in Peter Parker's high school, where for some reason they're trying to reintegrate original classes despite the 5-year age gap. Wait, what? Wouldn't those people have already graduated high school by now and moved on to boring, unfulfilling corporate jobs that slowly bleed away every ounce of hope, passion and ambition they once had? Or have they just been hanging around doing nothing for the past 5 years in the hopes that everything would someday go back to normal? Did the world literally just stop when Thanos snapped his fingers? Whatever. Peter Parker's back in high school and doing his best to move on from everything that happened in Endgame, especially the death of his mentor Tony. He's decided that the whole Infinity War thing was a bit intense for him, so he wants to put the superhero stuff on the back burner for now and focus on just being a regular teenager. And by that, I mean trying in vain to bone girls that don't seem to have any interest in him. The object of his affections in this case is MJ, although fuck knows why. I've had better conversations with toll booth attendants, because they can't walk away. Anyway, Peter's class is all excited because they're going on a summer field trip to a bunch of different European cities. Wow, lucky them. My school field trips never got beyond Methyl Beach, because most of my classmates came from families that treated KFC as nouvelle cuisine. It's also the reason my urine still glows in the dark to this day. I'm not sure I'm convinced by Peter's motivation here. You've jumped through interdimensional portals and walked on the surface of other planets, mate. You've battled titans and aliens for the fate of the entire universe. You've handled an infinity gauntlet and walked alongside literal gods. Surely maths exams in Fortnite is gonna seem pretty inconsequential now. Anyway, they go to Venice first and MJ's being annoying and weird as usual, and Peter's trying to work up the courage to ask her out, but then a magical water monster rises up out of the canal and starts destroying nearby buildings. So Peter's trying to protect people from the water monster, but then a magical space wizard wearing a fishbowl filled with bong smoke shows up and takes it on himself. And for some reason Peter wastes all his time and effort trying to stop a church tower from collapsing, even though there's nothing and nobody beneath it. It's almost like the scriptwriters just needed to keep him busy for a while. Anyway, Fishbowl Head kills the monster and then they meet with Nick Fury, who introduces him as Quentin Beck, aka Mysterio, and explains the thing they fought today was a water elemental. There were 3 others, but only one is left now, the fire elemental. You see, Beck comes from an alternate version of Earth that already got destroyed by these elementals, and he's here to stop the same thing from happening again. Wow, this guy almost seems too good to be true. According to Beck, the last and most powerful elemental is due to appear in Prague in 2 days from now. They have to get there and intercept it, or it'll destroy the planet. Unfortunately, all the other Avengers are conveniently unavailable. And I'm not kidding, they literally say Doctor Strange and Captain Marvel are unavailable. And I guess Black Panther's too busy with that community centre in Oakland. But what about War Machine, or Falcon, or Hawkeye? Anyone? It's become kind of a running joke in these lower tier Marvel movies that the other Avengers never have time to help them out, because obviously they could sort the entire thing out in like 5 minutes. And to be fair, it made sense in Spider-Man Homecoming because Peter was basically up against petty criminals armed with laser guns. But now he's in the big leagues. These elementals have the potential to end all life on Earth. Isn't that worth mobilising the B team at least? Anyway, Fury wants Peter to team up with Beck to stop the final elemental and save the world. But Peter's like, nah, it'll be fine. Beck can handle this himself. I guess he's not worried about the fate of the world anymore, so he tells Fury to piss off and he leaves to try to bone MJ again. Good luck with that one, son. She looks like she'd rather pretend to know something about video games than let you play hide the sausage with her. Is it just me, or does this scene play out like a fucking goofy sitcom? Ignoring for a moment the ridiculous idea that anyone in their right mind would send a 16-year-old kid into battle against enemies beyond our scientific comprehension, the fact remains that Nick Fury is one of the most powerful and experienced military commanders on Earth. Well, apart from that moment we'd rather forget.
Oh, mother...
And if Nick tells you to jump, you'd be well advised to ask how high. This really isn't the kind of man you say no to, and even if he was, the elementals pose an existential threat to the entire planet, the thing you and all the people you love live on, Peter. It pisses me off when movies lay out a simple, logical and easy to follow path for the hero to walk down, only for him to refuse it because the story needs to generate some cheap drama by making him question if he's up to the task. Captain Motherflurkin America never stopped to question whether he was worthy or ready for what he had to do. He just went ahead and got shit done, the American way. Be more Cap, son. Anyway, at least Peter doesn't leave empty-handed. Tony left him a pair of shit-looking sunglasses that are actually some kind of virtual interface to Edith, Tony's artificial intelligence that now manages his entire arsenal of orbital weapons, kill drones, and can hack any device on Earth. How many AIs has this guy gone through in the past few years? First it was Jarvis, and then that weirdo Friday.
Sokovia's going for a ride.
Ah, whatever. So when Peter gets back to his hotel, he discovered the school tour's been redirected to Prague, and everyone just totally goes along with this drastic change of plan without question. What's a coincidence? So they get on a bus and leave, and Peter almost gets them all killed by accidentally misusing Edith, but somehow he manages to brush it off and everyone acts like nothing happened. Wow, these are truly some of the dumbest, most oblivious people I've seen in my entire life. Your bus almost went off a cliff, a fucking armed drone crashed into the road and exploded like 20 yards behind you, and 10 seconds later you're all chatting and clowning around like you're having the time of your lives. Fuck off, film. So they get to Prague and the fire elemental shows up and Peter and Beck fight it, and Beck ends up doing some special move that finally kills it. But during the battle, a piece of it gets blown off and lands conveniently close to MJ, who picks it up and puts it in her bag, as if this isn't some unknown and potentially deadly piece of alien tech that could explode or emit dangerous radiation or be infected with killer pathogens for all she knows. So Peter and Beck go for a drink to celebrate, when in Prague, eh? And Peter's got a real man crush on him. He's smart, he's powerful, he's brave and he's selfless. In short, he's the perfect guy to lead the Avengers now that Tony's gone. So Peter hands control of Edith to him without bothering to learn anything about his personal history or motives, and then he just leaves. And then Beck starts laughing because the whole thing was just some weird holographic projection, because I guess actual bars are in short supply in Prague or something. They're not, trust me. Neither are strip clubs or drug dealers. The point here though is that Beck's not a superhero from another dimension at all. The whole thing was a lie, designed so that he could get control of Edith. What's a barracuda, sir? It turns out that Beck is actually the leader of a group of former Stark Industries employees who faked the elemental attacks with holograms and remote-controlled drones so he could set himself up as a hero, and now Beck wants to become an Avenger because he's jealous of real superheroes? Wait, what? So that's his plan? To become an Avenger by killing off legitimate team members and actively diminishing the world's ability to survive existential threats? Why? Surely he must realise the other Avengers are going to show up sooner or later and see through his fakery, especially if he has to take on real enemies that can fight back. Nah, whatever. So Peter meets up with MJ and they have yet another awkward conversation, and then she tells him she figured out he's Spider-Man ages ago because she actually paid attention to the fact he constantly vanishes whenever Spider-Man shows up. To be fair, it's refreshing to see a movie finally acknowledge how fucking stupid the whole idea of alter egos actually is. But it's time to get the plot moving again, so MJ drops the piece of tech she recovered during the elemental battle, and it starts playing a holographic projection of one of the other elementals, and Peter immediately figures out that the whole thing was nothing but smoke and mirrors all along, and Beck is a total fraud. Wow, that was a lucky chain of events. I mean, if MJ hadn't found that projector unit and kept it with her without reporting it to the police, and she hadn't dropped it on the ground while she was talking with Peter, and it hadn't magically come to life despite being disconnected from its power supply and central control unit, and it hadn't started projecting an image of one of the other elementals right in front of them, then he'd have been none the wiser to what was happening. Where have I seen this kind of thing before? You know, I'm getting tired of Marvel movies relying on contrived bullshit like this to resolve their stories. Like, basically the entire third act of this movie hinges on a completely chance event that yields up some vital piece of information that would have gone totally unnoticed if things had played out literally any other way. It's the laziest and most contrived way of moving your plot forward because it requires absolutely no thought or imagination. It relies on nothing more than blind luck and a complete leap of logic on the part of the hero. A smarter script would have had Peter gradually piece together a trail of clues about Beck through hard work, determination and sheer intellect to arrive at his conclusion just in time to act. But no, why waste time on that kind of tedious character building stuff when we can just snap our fingers and have Peter magically put everything together? Fuck off, film. So anyway, Beck's gone to Berlin to meet with Nick Fury about joining the Avengers, because obviously they couldn't have just had the meeting in Prague where they already were. Gotta squeeze in another famous European city somehow, right? Sure you don't need to go to Budapest for some reason? So Peter goes there to warn Fury, but it turns out to be Beck in disguise. Beck uses his holograms to confuse Peter into giving up the location of his friends and lure him onto a railway line where he takes a fucking train to the face. But somehow he survives this and climbs aboard and passes out for the night. Wow, I know Spider-Man's meant to be stronger and tougher than the average human and all that, but this is some Thor level shit right here. I mean, that train must have been going at like 100 miles an hour. How did that not shatter every bone in his body? And why didn't the driver stop or report such a horrific incident to the police? Fuck off, film. So he wakes up in a prison cell in Holland. We've all been there, mate. Breaks himself out and flies to London to take on Beck before he can kill NJ and the others with a swarm of drones launched by Edith. So he gets there and finds Beck, who tries to use more holograms to confuse him like he did in Berlin. But this time, Peter uses his spidey sense to see through the illusion, and Beck ends up getting killed by stray gunfire. So the movie ends with Peter back in New York, and he goes on a date with MJ, who's still awkward and annoying, but then he finds out that Beck uploaded a video before he died that paints Spider-Man as the bad guy and gives away his secret identity. Whatever will he do next? And that's it, that's the plot of Far From Home. So what did I think about it? Well, there are plenty of things that Far From Home does right, so I guess I ought to talk about them first. Apart from a few glaring issues that I've already covered, the story generally hangs together pretty well. There are some decent character beats, and the pace rarely seems to drag, even though they could have skipped the school bus scene and it wouldn't have hurt the film at all. The hologram fights are fun to watch and visually impressive as Peter flails around in constantly changing environments, trying to defend himself against imaginary enemies, never knowing what's real and what isn't. It really demonstrates Mysterio's power as an illusionist and gives us an antagonist that's kinda different from most others we've seen. With no abilities of his own, he relies more on the image of power than power itself. That being said, the finale starts to rely a bit too much on the tired old Marvel beats we've seen a dozen times before. What's that? Our protagonist has to fight his way through an army of anonymous unmanned drones whose only real power is their ability to swarm and overwhelm him in order to reach his true enemy? Is there no end to your inventiveness, sir? Like basically every Spider-Man movie ever, Far From Home deals with the age-old struggle between power and responsibility, and our willingness, even our desire, to place that responsibility in the hands of a worthy hero, someone who can fight the battles we don't want to, who can shoulder the burdens so we don't have to. Peter's young and unprepared for what's been thrown at him, and like most kids that are in over their heads, he wants nothing more than a strong and capable adult to take the reins and tell him everything's gonna be okay. He desperately wants to believe that Mysterio can be that man, and it's only when he's forced to step up and defend his friends that he realises maybe the true potential lies within himself. See, it's really not that hard to give your protagonist an interesting arc, if you're willing to make them act like an actual human being. Tom Holland once again proves that he was the ideal casting choice for Peter, perfectly capturing not only the character's youthful energy and optimism, but also his self-doubt and teen angst. He's a kid torn between two very different worlds, still trying to hold on to one, even as fate pulls him more and more towards the other. It's charming and endearing, and he really seems to get what makes Peter such a popular character. There's been a lot of speculation about Spider-Man's role in the Avengers through Phase 4, and I think Far From Home drops some pretty heavy hints about him being the next Iron Man. Peter's smart and strong, but beneath the suit and the technology is a flawed and very human hero, forced to step up to the big leagues even if he's not ready for it. Peter doesn't have Tony's swagger and self-confidence, but neither does he suffer from his self-destructive arrogance and narcissism. He's a character who has a lot of room still to grow. I also have to give props to Jake Gyllenhaal for the way he switches so easily between the charismatic and heroic Mysterio and the bitter and volatile Beck. Mysterio's kind of a parody of our old perceptions of superheroes and a reflection of how expectations have changed after decades of comic book saturation. 10 years ago, you could almost imagine a character like him actually existing as the legit hero in his own movie. My only criticism is that it's never really made clear what his endgame is. What does he actually expect to achieve with his plan to impersonate a superhero? Clearly he's gonna get found out at some point. All we get is some vague speech about making people listen to him, but what does he have to say in that case? I mean, to be honest, this is a criticism I could level at most MCU villains, so I won't mark Far From Home down too badly for it, but it does kind of irritate me when movies put all their effort into how their antagonists do what they do, without really exploring the more interesting question of why. Maybe that's why I appreciated Thanos so much. One of the things that leached some of the fun out of Homecoming for me was the character of MJ. Every time Peter seemed to be having fun, this charisma vacuum would show up with some lame attempt at a witty put-down or a goofy joke that didn't land. Fortunately, the writers were smart enough to keep her screen time to a minimum, so when I found out that her romance with Peter was going to be central to the story this time around, I was kind of worried it would drag the whole movie down. But as it turns out, I was both right and wrong about this. Yeah, she's still stiff and wooden and annoying as fuck a lot of the time. Yeah, she still makes shit jokes that bomb harder than the US Air Force. And yeah, most of the time she acts like her character's on the autism spectrum, but every so often she'll loosen up, smile and laugh, and start acting like an actual human being, and I can stop gritting my teeth for a while and just enjoy the movie. Shame it doesn't happen more often, really. And if nothing else, I'll give the movie props for exercising a bit of common sense and having her simply work out Spider-Man's identity. Nick Fury also gets a decent amount of screen time, although he seems kind of neutered and clueless now, and they seem to play him for laughs more often than I'd like. Maybe I'm still a little sensitive after the way they totally abused him in Captain Marvel, but the scene where he keeps getting interrupted during a big dramatic briefing was just painful to watch. But Drinker, you mercurial polymath, I hear you say, the reason for Nick Fury's behaviour is explained in the post-credits scene. Well, theoretical straw man, that post-credits scene was probably one of the dumbest decisions Marvel ever made, because not only does it allow them to explain away any and all inconsistencies in his behaviour, but it casts doubt on basically everything his character's done up to this point. And I've got this weird suspicion that it was added in last minute for that very reason. As for the rest, what can I say? The soundtrack's fun and pretty appropriate for what's going on, and there's a nice callback to AC/DC from Iron Man that brought a twinge of nostalgia to my cold black heart. From a cinematography point of view, it's competently shot, and the special effects look great, but then what doesn't these days? Oh yeah, I'll have to talk about that one eventually. But that's a rant for another day. Right now, I guess it's time to deliver whatever passes for my conclusion about Far From Home. I'd said in previous Marvel videos that the MCU's become the cinematic equivalent of McDonald's these days, churning out a range of reliable but predictable products that satisfy your needs but rarely take any risks or make any deeper impressions. I also suggested that without the Infinity Saga to tie everything together, the series is at risk of running out of narrative steam. And having watched Far From Home, I can honestly say there's very little in this movie to change my mind. It's a decent enough film that's not going to challenge you in the slightest way. Much like its predecessor, it's a colourful, undemanding and refreshingly light-hearted effort that kept me reliably entertained for a couple of hours, even if it relies a little too much on humour and the likeability of its actors to coast to an easy victory. But once the credits rolled and I walked out of the cinema, I'd already pretty much forgotten half of what I'd just seen. Then again, there may have been another reason for that. Anyway, that's all I have for today. Go away now.